This stone's price is not measured in millions of dollars. Its price is 2 days of food for the entire planet, or the blood of 10 fallen empires. It was never bought or sold. It was torn from the eyes of idols, lured away through deception, hidden in elaborate hairstyles, seized as a spoil of war. This is the Koh-i-Noor, the most famous, and perhaps the most dangerous, diamond in human history. Legend says, whoever possesses this diamond will rule the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. After 7 centuries of wars and betrayals, today the British Crown is afraid to take it out of the vault. I know why. My name is David Harris. I'm 45, and I work as curator of the Royal Collection of Crown Jewels. This isn't the kind of job people talk about at parties. People imagine glamour, crowns, ceremonies. In reality, my daily work involves documents, temperature charts, security protocols, and objects that have too often become the reason for other people's decisions and other people's deaths. I don't come from an aristocratic family. My father was an engineer who believed in precise calculations. My mother taught chemistry and always said that every reaction has a cause, even if we don't see it right away. That's probably why I never believed in curses. For me, there were signatures, seals, dates, and legal language. If a document was properly drawn up, the matter was considered closed. I first saw the Koh-i-Noor during my early days in this position. I was still getting used to the responsibility, still trying to understand the logic of this collection, not through catalogs, but with my own eyes. The jewel room was full of tourists. Guides talked about carats and cuts. Cameras clicked. People moved slowly, as if afraid to miss something important. I stopped in front of the display case almost by accident. The stone didn't look the way I'd expected. It didn't dazzle, didn't try to please. The lamplight seemed not to reflect off it, but to enter and linger inside longer than it should. It was hard to explain, but your eyes could feel it. You shouldn't stare at it too long, I heard behind me. It was Edward, my mentor, a man who had worked with the crown jewels almost his entire life. Why? I smiled. It's not dangerous. Edward didn't answer right away. He was looking not at me but at the stone. There are things, he finally said, you shouldn't rush with. I took it as part of the internal traditions. Every old place has its stories to frighten newcomers. You seriously believe that? I asked. I believe in patterns, he answered calmly, and this stone's pattern is too consistent. He named the number of owners, named their endings, without emotion, like dry statistics. Then he left, leaving me with a strange feeling I couldn't immediately articulate. I stood in front of the display a while longer before walking away. And only much later did I realize I'd stepped back, not because someone was in my way, but because I'd wanted to. I didn't think much of it then. That's what I thought until a few months before the coronation, when the system began behaving differently. Preparations proceeded quietly, without public fanfare, but inside there was tension. Every symbol, every object scheduled to appear on ceremony day underwent additional review. Not because of superstition, because of politics. The world was watching London closely, and any small detail could spark an international incident. That's when I was asked to reopen the Koh-i-Noor archive. The wording was dry. Verify and confirm the British Crown's legal right to the stone in case of potential international claims. India, Pakistan, Iran. The list was familiar. My task had nothing to do with legends or emotions. I needed facts. Facts precise enough to lay on a negotiation table, with nothing more to explain. I was certain this would be a formality. a few weeks, and done. I didn't yet know I would spend 3 months in the archives, or that afterward, the word formality would disappear from my vocabulary. I knew this history in broad strokes, the way anyone who works with major gemstones knows it. The name, the origin, a few key dates. But when you walk past the same display case for years, sooner or later you get the feeling you don't know everything. Not because facts are missing, but because there's too much silence between them. I returned to the archives with a different mindset. I wasn't interested in how the stone ended up in London. I knew that. I was interested in where and by whom it became what we consider it today. Its path began long before London, and in a very different India, not the one described by colonial officials in reports and treaties. The first traces lead to the 14th century, to the mines of Golconda. Back then, diamonds weren't ornaments in our sense. They weren't valued in numbers. They weren't displayed. In the ancient texts I consulted, a diamond is never described as an object. It's spoken of as a vessel, as something capable of containing power. Rajas wore such stones not for beauty. They believed a diamond could protect a ruler, not from an enemy, but from chaos. In these sources, the Koh-i-Noor doesn't belong to a specific person. It simply remains near power, like a condition, like a shadow. One thing caught my attention. In the earliest mentions, there's no word for possession. The stone isn't passed down as inheritance. It isn't bought. It moves forward with the shift of power, with war, with collapse. And the longer I read, the clearer it became. At first, this stone didn't symbolize power. It accompanied it. But then the Mughals appeared in this history, and with them, everything changed. The attitude toward the stone, its place, its role. What had once been protection gradually became demonstration. What was meant to remain near was lifted above the ruler's head. From this moment, the Koh-i-Noor's story stops being local. It becomes imperial. The name that changes the scale of the Koh-i-Noor's story is Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal, and the man who decided that power must look so magnificent it could not be ignored. It was by his command that they created the Peacock Throne. In the documents, it's described without exaggeration. There's simply no need. Pure gold, thousands of rubies and emeralds, stones from every corner of the empire, gathered in one place. But the quantity wasn't the point. I found several sketches of this throne. It was the size of a small room. Not furniture, architecture. 2 golden peacocks with spread tails rose above the emperor's seat. Their wings were so densely studded with gems that the boundary between metal and jewels disappeared. Light slid across the surface, never lingering anywhere for long, and Shah Jahan ordered the Koh-i-Noor placed directly overhead, not in the crown, not to the side, above, as the center of the entire structure. This throne wasn't built for comfort. It was built to overwhelm, and for a time, it worked. European travelers who saw the throne don't write about fear or mysticism. They write about being stunned, about how after seeing this hall, every other throne seemed poor by comparison. But in the archive, I found another document, a letter from the court physician. 1658. It wasn't a report, just personal notes. The emperor increasingly stares at the throne at night, he wrote. He says the stone speaks to him, and that his son will come for it. The physician didn't explain. He simply recorded. A month later, the son did come. Shah Jahan was overthrown without dramatic scenes or symbols. He was locked in a fortress. He spent his final years in a cell with one narrow window. From there, he could see the Taj Mahal, The building he'd constructed not for an empire, but for one person. They say he stared in that direction for hours. The Peacock Throne did not survive the empire. It was dismantled, looted, carried away in pieces. But not the stone. The Koh-i-Noor moved on, no longer as part of a throne, but as a trophy. In 1739, Nader Shah entered Delhi. There was almost no resistance. The city surrendered quickly. Nader Shah took everything of value. Gold and silver were hauled away in caravans. The Peacock Throne was dismantled right there in the palace, without ceremony, without any attempt to preserve its integrity. But one thing among all the treasures could not be found. The Koh-i-Noor was missing. The emperor had hidden it in his turban, not as decoration, as a last chance to conceal at least something. Nader Shah learned this from a traitor. He didn't demand the stone, didn't threaten, didn't issue orders. Nader Shah arranged a feast, declared a truce, proposed brotherhood. And then he invoked an ancient custom, the exchange of turbans as a sign of peace. To refuse would mean starting a new war. I found the diary of a Persian officer who was at that feast. He wrote, "When the turban was unwrapped, the light from the stone struck so sharply that all conversation in the hall stopped. Nader Shah spoke only one word, Koh-i-Noor, mountain of light. Nader Shah possessed the stone for 8 years. That was enough for suspicion to become routine. He trusted his circle less and less, and acted more harshly than the situation demanded. He was killed by his own officers, without ceremony. The stone changed hands again. After Nader Shah's death, the Koh-i-Noor's story loses all stability. It never stays anywhere for long. Names change. Languages change. Countries change. In one case, the stone goes to a man who doesn't trust even his own family. In another, it appears at a celebration that ends before anyone can finish a toast. Elsewhere, it's carried away in haste, with whatever can be saved before flight. I simply kept reading. And I saw that these stories don't end with inheritance or peaceful transfer. They break off. A century after Nader Shah, the Koh-i-Noor would arrive at another point of transition. This time, between the old world and a new power that would decide it could hold the stone forever. And then we arrived. The British, 1849. After several wars, Punjab ceased to exist as an independent state. On paper, it looked like annexation. In reality, it was the end of an entire world. The last ruler was a boy. He was 10 years old. Duleep Singh. When I first opened his file, what struck me wasn't the photograph or the titles. It was the silence in the documents. There was almost nothing about his childhood, as if it had never existed. I found the treaty in the archive. The paper had long since yellowed, the ink had bled in places, but the text remained clear. The lawyers knew what they were doing. It stated, "The stone that belonged to the Maharaja of Lahore is transferred to the Queen of England." At the bottom, a signature, childish, uneven. The kind that appears when a hand isn't yet used to holding a pen for long. I stared at it for a long time. And I wasn't thinking about politics. I was thinking about whether anyone had explained to this child what he was signing. He was separated from his mother almost immediately, taken from the country he was meant to rule, but never got to know. In London, they raised him as a gentleman, polite, presentable, convenient. They gave him a new faith, a new language, a new biography, but no choice. He lived the rest of his life in England, not as a king, not even as an exile in the full sense, more like a reminder of what had happened. Before his death, Duleep Singh wrote a letter to Queen Victoria. I held it in my hands. The paper was thin, the handwriting more even than in the treaty. There was no anger in it, only one sentence that's hard to read aloud. I was a child. I didn't understand what I was signing. Return the stone. It belongs to my people. There is no reply in the archive, only a notation that it was received. I closed the file and couldn't move on to the next document for a long time. When the Koh-i-Noor arrived in London, expectations were high. People had talked about the stone long before it appeared in public. It was called the Empire's greatest trophy. When it was first displayed, people leaned closer to the glass, waited for brilliance. But the stone didn't deliver. It looked restrained. Its shape was unusual to European eyes. Under gaslight, it didn't sparkle the way they expected. This wasn't kept quiet. Newspapers wrote that the legend had failed to impress, that the stone from India looked strangely plain. The old Indian cut had been designed for different light, different space, different eyes. In London, this wasn't accepted. Prince Albert supported the decision to recut it. He believed the form could be changed. When the work was finished, only 105 carats remained of the original 186. Everything else was ground away. Officially, this was called a success. The stone finally sparkled as expected. I found the report of the master who did this work. The main text was dry and precise, but at the bottom of the page, after the signature, someone had added a few lines by hand. The master noted that the work was complete, and that he would never take on such a commission again. He mentioned several weeks without sleep, and that the stone kept appearing in his dreams. A year later, this man died of a heart attack. He was 42. In the documents, these events are not connected. After the recutting, the Koh-i-Noor became pleasing, understandable, predictable. I avoided this chapter for a long time, not because I didn't see the patterns, but because I didn't want to draw conclusions from them. In documents from Queen Victoria's era, there's one detail usually mentioned in passing, as if it's a minor thing, as if it's just tradition. After everything that had happened with the stone by the mid-19th century, she ordered that the Koh-i-Noor should never again be worn by a man. It would only be set in the crowns of queen consorts. No explanation, no commentary, just a rule. I returned to these papers repeatedly, and each time caught myself asking one question: why exactly this way? Victoria wasn't a woman of mysticism. She didn't think in terms of curses. She thought in terms of consequences. And there were too many consequences. When I laid out the entire chronology in a single line, the picture that emerged was uncomfortable. The stone changed owners, and each time, stability disappeared with it. I tried to dismiss it, explain it through politics, through the context of the eras, through wars that would have been inevitable anyway. But then I looked at something else. 1849. That's when the Koh-i-Noor arrived in London. Not immediately, not suddenly. But from that moment, a slow reverse movement begins. The empire still looked unshakable. It still held India, parts of Africa, influence in the Middle East. On maps, everything remained in place. But if you look not at maps, but at years, something else becomes visible. What seemed eternal begins to shrink. Not in a day, not in a decade. In roughly 100 years, almost nothing remains of the former grandeur. I'm not saying the stone caused this. I don't believe in such explanations. But I see the numbers, the dates, the sequence. Every man in whose hands the Koh-i-Noor ended up eventually lost everything he considered unshakable. And the state that took the stone last followed the same path, just more slowly and on a larger scale. I found Victoria's private correspondence from 1887, her golden jubilee year. 50 years on the throne, the height of imperial power. In one letter to her daughter, she wrote something that wasn't meant for public record. "I have given orders regarding the stone. Let no king wear it. The history is too clear. I will not have it said that I ignored what was written in blood across 3 centuries." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Victoria had access to the same archives I did. She'd seen the same names, the same endings. The difference was, she had the power to make a decision. I don't believe in curses, but when a pattern repeats too often, it becomes difficult to call it coincidence. When I finished my work, what lay before me wasn't a series of separate stories. It was one long line, through centuries and documents. I simply looked at it whole. And on Coronation Day, I noticed one detail. The stone wasn't there. It wasn't brought out, wasn't made part of the ritual. For most people, this meant nothing. For me, it was entirely logical. Because after everything I'd seen in the documents, sometimes absence speaks louder than any presence. Today, the mountain of light lies behind bulletproof glass, in the Tower of London. It's the only major diamond in the world that was never purchased. It always passed from hand to hand as a spoil of war or as payment for survival. Legally, Britain has a document. It's neat. It's valid. It closes the matter in courts. But this document doesn't explain why the stone is no longer raised above crowds, or why on Coronation Day it remained behind glass. The Koh-i-Noor is not an ornament, not a trophy. It's a reminder that the right of possession does not always mean the right to wear. It remains a silent prisoner of history, reminding us, for every great treasure, sooner or later, payment comes due. The only question is, with what?